Behind palace doors, Queen Camilla's furious shouting stunned everyone, but no one more than King Charles himself. Sources say she questioned his strength, his loyalty, even his legacy. Moments later, he was seen in tears, red-eyed, shaken, and alone. What triggered this royal outburst? And why has everything changed since? The shouting no one expected. It was supposed to be a quiet evening. King Charles had returned to Highgrove House, retreating to his private study, a place he considered his sanctuary. But what happened inside those walls shattered every sense of calm he sought. According to senior staff stationed nearby, it started with raised voices. Not Charles, but Queen Camilla's. Her tone wasn't strained, it was furious. Sharp, fast, and escalating. One security officer, stationed just outside the study door, later recalled, "It wasn't a conversation. It was an attack. She wasn't holding back." Sources confirm Camilla's words were brutal. She questioned Charles's loyalty, accused him of being too weak, and even hinted that his children were replacing her in the monarchy's inner circle. Her voice reportedly echoed through the hallway. But what shocked the staff most wasn't her anger. It was Charles's silence. Inside, he barely responded. No shouting, no confrontation, just stunned stillness. 10 minutes later, the shouting stopped. The door creaked open, and Camilla stormed out, face flushed, jaw tight. She didn't look back. And then came the moment that rippled through the entire estate. King Charles, still seated behind his desk, was seen by his valet, red-eyed, pale, and visibly shaken. He slowly closed the doors behind him, his hand trembling as he reached for the handle. One source described it best. He looked like a man whose heart had been cracked. That night, no official statement was made, no clarification. But within the walls of Highgrove, the message was clear. The king had just endured a public breakdown in private, and the palace would never look at Camilla the same way again. The trigger. What set Camilla off? The shouting didn't happen in a vacuum. It had a trigger, a moment Camilla considered betrayal. Just 2 days earlier, King Charles held a closed-door meeting with Princess Anne and Prince William. Camilla was not invited. And that, insiders say, was the spark. The meeting, while private, reportedly focused on reshaping royal public duties, specifically rebalancing appearances between Charles, William, and Catherine, and reducing the Queen's presence in sensitive media events. The reason? Stability optics, as one courtier phrased it. Camilla didn't hear it from Charles. She found out from an aide after the decision had been made. She felt blindsided. "You're cutting me out," she reportedly shouted at Charles when confronting him in his study. "After everything I've done, after everything I've put up with." She didn't ask him. She demanded answers, but her questions weren't gentle. They were searing. Those nearby said she accused Charles of being manipulated by Anne and William, of being too soft, and of giving Catherine the crown early. Charles tried to calm her. He asked her to sit, to talk it through. She refused. "I've been your strength. Don't you dare make me your shadow," she allegedly snapped. That wasn't just frustration. It was fury. A deeper resentment that had been building for months, possibly years. For Charles, it was a devastating realization. Not just that his queen was angry, but that her anger was directed squarely at him. In a household that thrives on quiet protocol and controlled diplomacy, this verbal explosion shattered the atmosphere. And in the days to come, that explosion would send tremors through the entire monarchy, starting with Charles himself. Charles crumbles. The moment he broke. The aftermath of the confrontation wasn't loud. It was hauntingly quiet. After Camilla stormed out of the study, King Charles remained seated behind his desk for several minutes, unmoving. Staff say he looked like a man in shock. His face was pale, his eyes wet, and his posture slouched, defeated. One trusted valet entered shortly after to collect documents. What he saw, he wouldn't forget. His hands were shaking. He was just sitting there, staring at the carpet. It wasn't anger. It was heartbreak. The valet reported that Charles wiped away tears and whispered softly, "She doesn't see me anymore. Not as a man, not as a king." To those who know Charles, this emotional collapse was out of character. He's long been known for avoiding confrontation, preferring quiet diplomacy over heated debates. But this moment had stripped him bare. His own queen had cut into the deepest parts of his identity. It wasn't just about a disagreement. It was about everything he feared. That he wasn't strong enough, that he was being overshadowed by his own children, that Camilla, the woman he fought so hard to place by his side, no longer respected him. "I'm being erased," he reportedly muttered that night to a close aide. That evening, Charles canceled all briefings and private calls. His personal secretary quietly rescheduled 2 meetings. No explanations were given, just a note that the king would be unavailable for reflection. Within hours, word of the emotional breakdown began to circulate, not through tabloids, but within palace circles. Senior aides, shocked by the severity of the fight, began whispering behind closed doors. The king wasn't just upset. He was spiritually broken. And for the first time in his reign, insiders say there was real concern about his emotional well-being. But outside that study, the tension was only just beginning to spread. Palace staff left in shock. By the next morning, the atmosphere inside Clarence House had completely changed. The corridors, normally humming with structured calm, had turned into silent passageways. Staff spoke in hushed tones, glancing nervously as they passed one another. The ripple effect of Camilla's outburst had reached every corner of the household. "It felt like walking on glass," said one junior maid. No one knew what was safe to say anymore. Multiple staff members privately confirmed this wasn't the first time Camilla had raised her voice, but it was by far the most intense. A senior butler revealed, "There have been tensions before, but never like this. This crossed a line. We all felt it." At least 2 domestic staff members submitted quiet resignation requests within 48 hours of the incident. Not because of pay or duties, but because they could no longer tolerate the emotional pressure inside the royal residence. In response to the chaos, Charles's private security team reportedly limited Camilla's access to his personal quarters for several days. The directive didn't come with a public explanation, but everyone inside the palace understood. He needed space. From her. Meanwhile, the official palace press office remained completely silent. No statements, no corrections, no leaks. It was a full-scale internal lockdown, a rare measure usually reserved for deaths, constitutional emergencies, or international crises. This wasn't just a fight between spouses, one insider explained. This was a fracture in the crown itself. With no one speaking publicly, speculation grew rapidly inside the palace. Senior advisors began holding separate briefings, some with Charles, others with Princess Anne and Prince William. The divide was growing, not just emotionally, but operationally. And one thing was now certain. The staff no longer saw Camilla as untouchable. The fear was gone, replaced by quiet distrust. Because once you yell at the king, you can't pretend things are normal again. Camilla's fury wasn't just about power. Behind Camilla's volcanic outburst was something deeper than protocol or scheduling. It was insecurity, a quiet fear that had been growing for years, one now impossible to contain. According to multiple sources close to the Queen, the real trigger wasn't just being excluded from the meeting. It was watching Princess Catherine take on a larger and more beloved public image. Graceful, admired, and almost universally supported. The public had already begun to see Catherine as the true queen in waiting. And Camilla felt it. She sees Catherine everywhere, one longtime royal aide shared, in the press, in the crowds, in the conversations, and it's eating her alive. Camilla's journey into the monarchy was never smooth. Her past, tied to scandal and controversy, had always required a delicate balancing act. But with the rise of William and Catherine, her influence slowly began to erode. She no longer dominated royal headlines. Her initiatives, though important, received only brief attention. Meanwhile, Catherine's speeches, appearances, and causes trended worldwide. That imbalance wasn't just professional. It became personal. Insiders revealed that Camilla began complaining in private that Charles had become soft, allowing himself to be swayed too easily by William and Anne. She feared being phased out, not formally, but by silence, by irrelevance. "They're shrinking my crown without taking it off," she allegedly told a private confidant. And that fear turned into resentment. The fury she unleashed on Charles wasn't just about being excluded. It was months of emotional tension. A woman who felt eclipsed, who believed her sacrifices had been forgotten, and who feared being remembered not as a queen, but as a complication in the royal story. But instead of confronting her feelings through the press or in private dialogue, she turned the storm inward, directing it all at King Charles. And that choice, to attack the one person who protected her most, changed everything. Because Anne and William were watching, and they had seen enough. William and Anne step in behind the scenes. When Prince William and Princess Anne heard what had happened, the response wasn't public, but it was immediate. Anne, known for her discretion and steel backbone, requested a private breakfast with Charles the next morning. No aides, just siblings. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't criticize Camilla. She simply said, "You're the king. Start acting like it again." It hit Charles hard, but it was the truth he needed to hear. Later that same day, William arrived at Clarence House. While he didn't meet Camilla directly, insiders say he made one statement that reached every corner of the palace. That should never happen to the king. William was furious, not just as a son, but as a future monarch. He knew that emotional instability behind the throne meant instability for the entire institution. And what happened in that study wasn't a personal squabble, it was a public risk. Together, Anne and William began to quietly build a protective wall around Charles. They rearranged his private schedule, rebalanced internal access, and ensured that all strategic discussions went directly through him, without Camilla's gatekeeping. Anne used her network to alert key advisors to stay close to the king. William, with his growing influence over communications, redirected public focus onto his father's legacy and stability, steering media coverage away from Camilla entirely. Behind the scenes, they began to reposition Charles as a leader in control, not a man under emotional siege. "He's not just a king by title," William told one aide. "He needs to feel it again." And that shift worked. Charles began to speak with more confidence in meetings. He started asking direct questions, reasserting his decisions. For the first time since the coronation, he pushed back without needing to apologize. Camilla noticed it. Her circle noticed it. But there was nothing they could do, because the Queen's outburst hadn't just strained her marriage. It had activated a quiet power block, and at its heart were Anne and William, holding the line not just for the man, but for the crown itself. Camilla tries to regain control, but faces pushback. In the days following her explosive outburst, Queen Camilla attempted to reassert her influence, fast and forcefully. Her first move? A private luncheon invite to select media editors, a subtle but strategic gathering aimed at reshaping headlines and rebuilding her public image. But there was one problem. Charles hadn't approved it. When the event request passed through the palace communications office, it was immediately flagged. And for the first time in recent memory, protocol staff refused to authorize the Queen's request. The reason? Image risk, they cited quietly in internal memos. With tensions still high and the public unaware of what had occurred, a solo press engagement by Camilla was deemed dangerous. Worse, Princess Anne and the Lord Chamberlain, one of the monarchy's top internal officials, had reportedly intervened directly. They advised Charles that such an event could trigger internal backlash and distract from the monarchy's current stabilizing message. Camilla was furious. According to a staff member present during her outburst, she accused palace aides of freezing her out, warning that she would not be pushed into the background like a placeholder. But the signs were undeniable. Meetings were being scheduled without her. Appearances she previously led were now handled by Catherine or Anne. Even invitations to certain diplomatic briefings no longer came with her name attached. And Charles? He remained polite, but distant. Where once she had full access to his time, now she waited. Where her ideas were once swiftly approved, they now went through layers of clearance. "He's putting her back in the ceremonial box," said one senior aide. "She knows it, and she can't stop it." The Queen tried to regain footing, but the more she pushed, the more the palace resisted. The message was clear. Camilla could no longer act alone. Charles makes a quiet but powerful move. Behind the curtain of royal formality, King Charles was changing, and those closest to him saw it clearly. Gone was the man who avoided confrontation at all costs. In his place stood a leader. Wounded, yes, but no longer passive. He didn't make grand declarations. He didn't confront Camilla. He simply began to rearrange his court. The first major shift? Two of Camilla's most trusted aides, figures known for their tight control over her calendar and media strategy, were quietly relieved of their roles. No press statement, no warning, just reassignments under restructuring. In their place, Charles reinstated Sir Geoffrey Masters, a seasoned advisor from the early days of his reign. Known for his measured counsel and long history with both Queen Elizabeth II and Charles himself, Geoffrey's return signaled one thing: the king was taking back his authority. And Camilla noticed immediately. Her influence over court operations shrank almost overnight. Previously, she had final say on social planning and public engagement flow. Now, decisions went directly through Charles's inner office, with oversight from Anne and the Lord Chamberlain. Even the tone of staff shifted. They addressed her formally, respectfully, but without the same eagerness or warmth. The Queen was still present, but no longer central. The most symbolic moment came days later, when Charles restructured a key internal committee, removing Camilla's name entirely from matters of future succession protocol. That role now belonged to William, Catherine, and Anne. It was a quiet act, but it was a defining one. He didn't yell, a palace insider said. He didn't punish her. He just shut the door softly. Charles had drawn an emotional and professional boundary, and once set, he didn't reverse it. He still appeared with Camilla in public. He still smiled beside her. But privately, the king had reclaimed the space around him, protecting his peace and his position. This wasn't about revenge. It was about survival. And for the first time in years, Charles was no longer being shaped by the people around him. He was shaping the monarchy on his own terms. Public pressure mounts, and Catherine shines. While tension twisted behind palace doors, the public's attention turned elsewhere, toward Princess Catherine. In the weeks following the explosive confrontation, Catherine's public appearances became more powerful than ever. One particular moment stood out: a heartfelt speech on early childhood development, delivered with clarity, grace, and warmth. The video spread like wildfire, trending globally within hours. And the contrast was unavoidable. While Camilla remained hidden behind rehearsed smiles and stiff photo ops, Catherine radiated calm leadership. Her elegance wasn't forced. It didn't feel staged. She didn't need headlines to look like a queen. The people already saw her as one. "Every time Catherine steps out, she owns the room without trying," one royal reporter tweeted. "There's no contest anymore." Behind the scenes, this public support put immense pressure on King Charles. Advisors from both Buckingham Palace and Clarence House began suggesting that Camilla step back quietly from major engagements, not as punishment, but as rest. It was a move designed to let the storm pass without fueling more rumors. But insiders say Camilla wasn't ready to be sidelined, and that only intensified internal resistance. Meanwhile, Catherine's image soared. Online, hashtags like #OurFutureQueen and #CatherineStrong surged in popularity. Even casual royal watchers began posting side-by-side comparisons between the two queens: poise versus pressure, grace versus aggression. One viral comment summed up the public mood. "Catherine doesn't need a crown to look royal. She carries herself like a queen. Camilla just wears the title." The shift in perception was clear. The monarchy's future had a face, and it wasn't Camilla's. And deep within the palace, King Charles felt the weight of those shifting loyalties. But instead of rushing to defend either woman publicly, he did something more private, more personal. He wrote Charles's private letters and the truth they reveal. In the quiet hours of a particularly long evening at Clarence House, long after the staff had retired and the lights had dimmed across the royal corridors, King Charles sat alone in his private writing room. The only sound was the faint scratch of pen against paper and the rhythmic ticking of an antique clock gifted to him by his late mother. This wasn't protocol, it wasn't preparation for a speech, and it certainly wasn't public. Charles was writing letters, private, deeply personal reflections, addressed to the one person he trusted beyond court titles and political agendas. A retired spiritual advisor, a man who had once guided him through the emotional turbulence of his younger years. These letters weren't official. They weren't meant for documentation or history books. They were his escape. According to a trusted palace source who has seen portions of these letters, what they reveal is a king in deep emotional pain, wrestling not just with the burdens of monarchy, but with the unraveling of the one relationship he had fought the world to preserve. In one of the earliest entries, Charles wrote, "Sometimes I feel I've lost her, or maybe never had her fully." The line, referencing Camilla, carried more weight than any royal decree. It was an admission of vulnerability from a man who had once defied scandal, family disapproval, and global scrutiny to be with her. And yet, decades later, after marriage, coronation, and shared crown, there remained a void. Another letter came days later, after the now infamous outburst that left Charles visibly shaken and tearful in his study. The tone had shifted, still gentle, but edged with exhaustion. There is loyalty, there is history, but there is no peace. It was clear, this wasn't about a single argument. It was about a pattern, a recurring emotional chaos that had begun to threaten his stability and the unity of the monarchy itself. In one passage, reportedly written in his own slanted, hurried script, he described walking alone through the gardens of Highgrove, wrestling with the silence that had fallen between him and his wife. The crown is heavy, but the silence between us is heavier. Those few words, haunting in their simplicity, marked a turning point. Palace insiders say Charles began making quiet, deliberate changes soon after. He stopped attending late-night planning meetings with Camilla's team. He canceled several joint appearances without public explanation. And perhaps most notably, he began rebuilding his inner circle, starting with voices that brought calm rather than command. Princess Anne became a regular presence, dropping in for unannounced morning teas, keeping things informal but grounded. Prince William took on more advisory duties, particularly in foreign briefings and succession planning. And Charles reinstated two former aides, known for their discretion and emotional clarity, who had worked closely with Queen Elizabeth II in her later years. These weren't reactionary moves. They were protective ones. For the first time since his coronation, Charles began to shield his peace, actively, intentionally, and without apology. As for Camilla, she remained by his side at public events, maintaining the illusion of harmony for cameras and crowds. But those who stood near them noticed the difference. The stolen glances were gone. The warmth between words had cooled. There was distance now, an emotional fracture that couldn't be hidden behind royal robes or practiced smiles. And still, the letters continued. One final message, dated weeks after the argument, was particularly introspective. In it, Charles didn't mention Camilla by name, but the meaning was unmistakable. One can lead a nation, honor one's family, serve with discipline and grace, and still feel profoundly alone. The page reportedly ended with only one more sentence. "I miss being understood." That sentence broke the heart of the palace aide who read it. The marriage wasn't over, but the connection was altered. And for a man who had built his adult life around Camilla's presence, often against impossible odds, the loss of emotional closeness felt like a betrayal far deeper than any political scandal. Behind the grandeur of the palace gates, no official statements were made, no press leaks, no whispers to the tabloids, but everyone closest to the crown understood what had changed. Charles would carry on. He would reign. He would fulfill his duties. But from that point on, he would no longer allow himself to be ruled, not by love, nor guilt, nor the noise of conflict. The king had finally drawn his line in the sand, not with fury, but with a pen. And the silence that followed was his answer. Camilla's rage left scars, but it was Charles's quiet heartbreak that changed the palace forever. With support from Anne and William, the king began to reclaim control, emotionally and politically. The shouting may have ended, but the message was clear. This monarchy would no longer be ruled by chaos.